Chapter 20, Strategies for Supporting an Argument. The strength of an argument lies in its evidence. To construct a compelling argument, it's essential to back up your claims with strong, reliable evidence. Whether you're writing an essay, giving a speech, or presenting a research paper, your argument is only as solid as the support you provide. Let's explore key strategies for building an argument that resonates and persuades. 1. Analogies, making complex ideas relatable. Analogies are comparisons that highlight similarities between two otherwise different things. They help readers or listeners understand complex or abstract ideas by relating them to something more familiar. Why they matter in arguments. Analogies create vivid pictures and help make intricate points more accessible. They're particularly effective when explaining a difficult or nuanced topic by comparing it to something well understood. Example. Arguing that education is like building a house. You need a strong foundation before adding more complex elements. I think analogies, they're really good in teaching as well. If you can compare two things that people understand, you can hopefully get people to understand the harder topic, right? So you compare it to something that's easier to understand, like in this case, building a house to education. 2, cause and effect, understanding why things happen. Cause and effect analysis explores why something happened and what the outcomes were. Challenges. It can be tricky to argue cause and effect because it's often difficult to link a specific cause directly to the outcome. Many factors might contribute to an effect. Why it's important. Demonstrating causal relationships helps clarify the reasoning behind certain events or decisions, strengthening your position. For example, increased screen time causes higher levels of anxiety among teenagers due to the constant bombardment of social media notifications. 3, classification, organizing ideas into categories. Definition. Classification involves grouping items into categories based on their similarities. Purpose. Authors use classification to organize information logically, making it easier to understand. How it helps. When arguing, classification can make your points clearer by breaking down a complex issue into manageable parts. Example. Environmental policies can be classified into 3 types: conservation efforts, regulatory frameworks, and sustainable energy initiatives. Compare and contrast. Highlights similarities and differences. Definition. Comparing focuses on similarities, while contrasting highlights differences. Organization comparisons. Block method. Discuss one subject entirely before moving to the next. The point-by-point method. Compare subjects by addressing one aspect at a time. Why it's useful. Comparing and contrasting is valuable when you need to explain something unfamiliar by comparing it to something your audience already knows. Example. While both traditional education and online education offer similar content, traditional classrooms provide in-person interaction that online education lacks. For this, specifically when we're talking about like block method or point-by-point method, we're talking about different ways you could write a paper. Specifically, the block method, you would talk like one whole paragraph about a subject, and then you would go on to the next paragraph and you would talk about maybe the same points, just about a different subject. So again, let's go back to the Salem witch trials. It's fresh on my mind. If you were talking about the Salem witch trials, and then you were talking about a lot of points about it, you could then talk about, again, McCarthyism in the 1950s and make a lot of points about that. The other one is point-by-point method, where you would talk about both items at once. So you talk about the Salem witch trial and McCarthyism in the same paragraph and just talk about all the different points between them. And maybe you would have like 3 different paragraphs talking about one point apiece, if that makes sense, right? So you'd break it down more by like the items in the paper or the items you're going to compare and contrast than you would with just having like one by one, right? You're not going to just write one paragraph about Salem witch trial in that. You're going to write like about the people of that time. So then you would have like the people of this time in the Salem witch trials and McCarthyism, right? So the people of that time would be the better issue. And then you could have like the issue at hand would be like witches versus, communists, right? So you'd have different points versus entire whole paragraphs about each one. And those are just like, they're neither wrong nor right. You could do that either way. if that makes sense. Like that's comparing and contrasting like that. I like to write comparing and contrasting essays. Again, I think that's one of the easier ways to write essays is to compare things and contrast things. So I might choose that method for some of these papers, just as like easier to write about things if you've got something to compare it with, right? At least from my perspective. So that's just how we're looking at it. Again, there's no wrong or right way there. It just is like two different ways that you can look at doing that. Definitions, clarifying key concepts. Definition. Definitions are essential in arguments because they establish common ground. If readers disagree with your definition of a term, they might reject your argument outright. Purpose. A good definition provides clear explanations by highlighting distinguishing features, providing examples, and illustrating the concept. Why it's crucial. In debates over controversial topics, definitions shape the entire argument. For example, freedom of speech refers not just to the right to speak, but also the right to be heard without fear of censorship or retaliation. Again, here I would say what's important for us to note about definitions, especially for this paper we're about to do in the argumentative essay as well, that this could be a major portion of your essay, right? Because I know we're thinking a lot about like the three parts of ethos, pathos, and logos for a rhetorical essay, but we also need definitions of things, right? You need to explain things. In this case, you'd have to explain the Salem witch trials, right? Or anything else you'd want to talk about. And that could take up to a whole page, right? I mean, you could write several paragraphs, like you could write a whole book about it, right? So like easy, you could write a couple paragraphs about like, this is what we're going to talk about. This is the information that we're even going to cover here. And that's really important because again, if we're worried about having enough information or hitting that 3 to 5 pages, definitions is an easy way to write more, right? You write more about what we're going to talk about, and that's going to give people a clear picture when you go to the analyzation part of your paper, right? When you really start digging into things, like people are really going to know what you're talking about because you covered it with the definitions. Description, bringing concepts to life. Description explains how something looks, feels, sounds, smells, or tastes. The purpose. Good descriptions focus on concrete details, helping readers form mental images. How it supports arguments. Descriptions create a dominant impression that reinforces your argument by making abstract concepts more tangible. For example, the bustling city streets filled with the honking of cars and the chatter of people provide a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the countryside. Examples. The power of specificity. Examples provide concrete instances that illustrate abstract ideas or support claims. Well-chosen examples can make your argument more relatable and credible. Why they work. Examples ground theoretical claims in reality, offering proof through specific cases. One example of the benefits of recycling is San Francisco's waste management program, which diverts 80% of its waste away from landfills. This is another great Salem witch trials, great example just in general, but here the power of specificity really works because we got specific cases there, right? This happened to specific people, so you could talk about the specific people in that case and several of them, right? Like each of them could get a paragraph, each of them could get a piece of writing about, because they're specific examples, right? There's many people that could be about and not just one, or you don't have to have abstract ideas all the time, right? You could write examples about the one person specifically. 8. Humor, sarcasm, and exaggeration, using humor strategically. Humor, sarcasm, and exaggeration can support an argument by engaging the audience, but only if used appropriately. Caution. Humor is culture-bound and context-specific. Make sure your audience understands the joke, and avoid using humor that could alienate or offend. Purpose. Humor can lighten serious topics by making your argument more approachable and memorable. For example, politicians' promises are like New Year's resolutions, easier to make than to keep. Humor, obviously, always a good idea to add to papers, or at least in my opinion, but I like to think that I'm funny, so I like to add humor to my work. That being said, sometimes it's not the best case scenario. Again, maybe Salem witch trials is, kind of hard to add some humor to that, or you got to be more strategic about it because it's just like a really not funny topic at the end of the day, right? So You got to be careful about it. Again, you're not going to offend me, so don't worry about that. But sometimes it doesn't land. I used to do this probably when I was in a class like this, or probably more so when I went into my undergraduate degrees in politics. So when I wrote papers on political things, I would add a lot of humor and sarcasm and exaggeration, and it would just be very sharp. And I don't know if that won me any points with my professors or not. And I don't know if it was funny, but I was just trying to make a point about things, right? So you can do that. It kind of depends on who your audience is, right? I always think about the rhetorical situations, but narration and storytelling engage your audience. Definition: narratives are stories that illustrate a point. Purpose: stories can make arguments more engaging by offering real-life examples that readers can connect to. Caution: while storytelling can be compelling, it should not be the only form of evidence, particularly in academic contexts. For example, a young boy from a rural town overcame immense obstacles to attend college, showing the power of education. For this one, storytelling, I think that you could use a lot of, let's go to the Arcane show here. If you wanted to write about storytelling here and kind of make a point, you might be able to tell a story about somebody and then about somebody in the real world and how that could fit into Arcane, if that makes sense. If that's the point you're trying to prove, that like our world is kind of like their world, just take a story of somebody from the real world and then add it to that. Does that make sense? You're kind of like, hey, like this is why it's so similar. Like this could be right out of that because like this story is true, right? If this story is true, like how far are we from this dystopian world that, I'm now talking about? Yeah, same thing, Salem witch trials. If you're going to tell a narrative about that, there's so many. Again, we can go back to the examples, right? But your example could be the story of somebody that went through the Salem witch trials, right? And how their life ended up because of that. Problem solution, offering a way forward. Problem solution arguments identify an issue and propose ways to address it. Why it's effective. This method is straightforward and action-oriented, ideal for proposals and recommendations. For example, the problem of plastic pollution can be solved by banning single-use plastics and encouraging reusable alternatives. 11. Repetition, reiteration, and call and response, reinforcing key points. Repetition emphasizes a key word or phrase, helping to drive home your point. Purpose: like a drumbeat, repetition can add rhythm and power to your argument. How it works: reiteration builds emphasis, making your arguments more memorable and persuasive. For example, we must act now, we must act decisively, we must act for future generations. See how we use "we must" over and over. Again, I think this is going to go more for the argumentative essays than probably for this one, but it is a technique that you could use to try to make your point a little bit stronger, right? I always think about "I have a dream" for this one. He says "I have a dream" many, many times, right? And that's part of the reason why that speech is so powerful, because we can all kind of get that idea. So, yeah, again, this is just something to think about when you're writing. If you find that you're already kind of like leaning that way anyways, and you have something you're trying to make a point about, that you could just keep trying to make that same point by using similar words, repeating them, reiterating your idea over and over again, right? Signifying, underscoring through humor. Definition: signifying is a strategy that issues humor or indirect speech to emphasize an important point. This method can highlight truths or ideas through clever and often subtle remarks. Conclusion: a variety of strategies exist for supporting an argument effectively. Whether through examples, analogies, or humor, each tactic offers a unique way to bolster your position. By learning how to use these tools effectively, you can craft arguments that are compelling, relatable, and persuasive. Precision in academic writing, avoiding absolute terms. A crucial aspect of academic writing, avoiding the use of absolute terms like always, never, and impossible. Academic writing requires precision, critical thinking, and nuance, and these qualities can be undermined by the use of absolute language. We'll also discuss a few other strategies that help you write with more clarity, accuracy, and professionalism. Why avoiding absolute terms in academic writing? In academic writing, the goal is often to present arguments, analyze data, and explore complex ideas. Using absolute terms can weaken your writing in several key ways. Lack of precision. Absolute terms like always and never can make your writing inaccurate. For example, writing that this theory always works is rarely true because most theories have exceptions or limitations. Similarly, saying that something never happens can easily be disproven with a single counterexample. Academic writing demands precision, so using more qualified language helps avoid oversimplification. Instead, try using terms like often, typically, or in most cases. These phrases acknowledge that while something may be true, in many instances, it's not universally applicable. This is something I brought into the course, or something I think is important here. My big example is I try to not use impossible anymore. I try to say improbable when I talk about things because there's very few things that are actually impossible to happen. Sure, a lot of things are improbable, right? They probably won't happen, but that doesn't mean that they're impossible. Now, I think that this is more important in academic writing, again, because when we say something like always, never, impossible, it's pretty easy to prove that that's actually not the case, right? That, if you say something is never going to happen, all someone has to do to disprove your theory is to write how one thing could happen, right? So when you say never or always, right, it's an absolute. So instead of using absolutes, we should just be using, again, impossible, improbable, things like improbable, like this probably won't happen, but it doesn't mean it won't ever happen. So risk of overgeneralization. When we use absolutes, we overgeneralize. This can make your writing less credible because readers know that very few things in life or research are black and white. If you write, the economy never improves under these policies, you're making a sweeping generalization that is almost certainly inaccurate. It's important to remain open to complexity even when you're presenting a strong argument. A better way to phrase such a statement would be, the economy rarely improves under these policies based on current data, which presents your argument in a nuanced and fact-based manner. Undermining critical thinking. Academic writing is about exploring complexities and demonstrating critical thinking. By using absolute terms like impossible, you close off possibilities that should be examined. For instance, writing "it's impossible to solve this issue" disregards potential solutions or developments that may not yet have been discovered or discussed. Instead, try "it might be extremely difficult to solve this issue with current methods," which leaves room for future discoveries and ongoing research. Alternatives to absolute language. To improve the quality of your academic writing, it's important to use flexible and precise language. Here are some strategies. Use qualifiers and hedging language. Qualifiers like often, sometimes, or likely help you present ideas without overgeneralization. Hedging phrases like "it appears that," "the data suggests," or "it is possible" are common in academic writing because they demonstrate thoughtfulness and an openness to other interpretations. For example, instead of writing "this solution always works," write "this solution often works" in similar contexts, which introduces flexibility and acknowledges that there may be exceptions. Avoiding certainty when discussing results. In research, results are rarely absolute. For example, if a study finds a correlation between two variables, it's important to use language that reflects that uncertainty. Rather than saying "this proves X," opt for "this suggests a strong correlation with X." This approach respects the limitations of the data and avoids overstating the findings. Embrace complexity and specificity. Academic writing is not about simplifying reality, but exploring its complexities. When you avoid absolutes, you open the door to a richer, more in-depth analysis. For instance, instead of writing "Shakespeare's plays are always about power," you could write "many of Shakespeare's plays explore themes of power, but they also delve into personal relationships and morality." This way, your writing becomes more layered and thoughtful. Be open to contradictions and counterarguments. One of the key features of academic writing is the consideration of counterarguments and alternative perspectives. Using absolute terms like "never" and "impossible" can prevent you from fully engaging with opposing viewpoints. When you acknowledge complexity, your arguments become stronger because you show an awareness of potential contradictions. For example, instead of writing "this method never fails," consider writing "this method has proven effective in many studies, though there are instances where it has been less successful." In conclusion, academic writing is an exercise in precision, critical thinking, and flexibility. By avoiding absolute terms like always, never, and impossible, we leave room for complexity, openness, and intellectual exploration. Instead, we should strive for language that acknowledges nuance and focuses on accuracy. Remember to use qualifiers and avoid overgeneralization. Remain open to new ideas in your writing. By adopting these habits, you'll strengthen your arguments and elevate the overall quality of your academic work. I know we already talked a little bit about this before, but I did say then that I had a specific lecture on it. So we're talking about connecting words, not starting words, using fanboys effectively. Today we're talking about a common pitfall in writing: starting sentences with coordinating conjunctions. The words we're focusing on are known as fanboys, which stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These words are called coordinating conjunctions, and they're designed to join two related ideas within a single sentence, not to begin new sentences. What are fanboys? Fanboys is a mnemonic for the 7 coordinating conjunctions. For shows reason, and adds information. Nor provides an alternative negative, but shows contrast, or presents an option, yet introduces a contrast. So shows a cause or effect. Each of these words has a specific purpose in connecting thoughts. When used correctly, they enhance the flow and cohesion of your writing. Again, I know we talked about this quite a bit already, or at least a little bit, but these are just things that we shouldn't be starting sentences with. I think the biggest one I see is probably so. A lot of people start sentences with so. I personally think that's because when we speak, we start a lot of sentences with so, if that makes sense. Like if you're just talking a lot, you might say like, so this happened and then so that happened, right? So in our writing, we say that a lot too. We'll start a sentence with so. I think it's oftentimes just as easy as I've explained before, but I don't think that this can, I don't even want to say like stating it as many times as I can, but I think that if we talk about this quite a bit, that, I don't think it's an idea that is going to hurt us by just talking more and more about, right? Because everybody does it. I'm sure even I do this sometimes. I try to avoid it, but just starting sentences with so, most of the time, it's as easy as just erasing the so, right? And I'm sure I did this on a lot of your papers, your rough drafts, right? You're going to erase I think for is another big one. I didn't see as many ands. I think most people understand that you don't write and first, right? That's not like you just don't start sentences with and. I think that's like a pretty typical rule. But I think the rule just extends to a lot of these. I think I saw a lot of but. I don't know if in here or just in general, I see a lot of like sentences that start with but. And again, they shouldn't start with but. And you should just erase that word. Start with a new sentence and just uppercase the next word, right? Each of these words has a specific purpose in connecting thoughts. When used correctly, they enhance the flow and cohesion of your writing. Why to avoid starting sentences with fanboys? They're meant to connect ideas within sentences. The primary role of fanboys is to connect clauses within a single sentence. For example, instead of writing, I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. Try, I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. By keeping fanboys within the sentence, you're connecting the ideas directly and making your writing more cohesive. 2. Starting with fanboys can make sentences sound incomplete. When you start a sentence with fanboys word, the sentence can sound like a fragment, lacking the context provided by the previous idea. For example, I was hungry, period, and there was no food in the fridge. Revised, I was hungry, comma, and there was no food in the fridge. It creates unnecessary repetition. Using fanboys at the start of a sentence can make writing feel choppy and repetitive. For example, he studied hard, period, but he didn't pass the exam, period, so he was disappointed. Revised, he studied hard, comma, but he didn't pass the exam, comma, so he was disappointed. Do you see how you can just change that sentence up by taking the periods out and, again, not starting those sentences with the fanboys, but instead adding commas and making it a longer, more complex sentence? I typically say not to do that because in my brain it's easier to make these several different sentences. That might make your writing sound a little bit more choppy. That kind of is up to you what you're looking to do. Like Again, I just think it's easier to take out commas and add periods, but the revision smooths out the flow and makes the writing feel more sophisticated and polished. How to use fanboys correctly. To understand how to use fanboys effectively, let's look at the role each one plays in connecting ideas. 4. Explains a reason. For example, she stayed late for she had extra work to complete. And adds information. Example, he likes playing soccer, comma, and he's also interested in basketball. Nor connects negative ideas. For example, he didn't want to study, comma, nor did he want to go to the library. But introduces a contrast. She wanted to attend the concert, comma, but the tickets were sold out. Or presents an alternative. Example, would you prefer tea, comma, or would you like coffee? Yet, similar to but it also introduces contrast. Example, he's very talented, comma, yet he remains humble. And so, shows cause and effect. For example, it was raining, comma, so they decided to stay indoors. Each of these examples shows fanboys within a single sentence, connecting related ideas and providing a context. When it's okay to start a sentence with fanboys. While formal writing generally avoids starting sentences with fanboys, you might see this technique in informal or creative writing. However, even then it's used sparingly and for stylistic effect, not as a regular habit. In academic writing, it's best to avoid starting with fanboys because it can make your writing appear less structured and polished. Instead, focusing on restructuring your sentences to incorporate fanboys within the sentence. I want to bring this up why I talk about this so much. I do not consider myself really, when I grade, to be a grammar Nazi or like somebody that, like, I'm not really trying to overanalyze things when I'm reading. I'm trying to like read for just cohesion and what makes sense. That being said, like, these always jump out at me. And if I'm seeing them a lot, that means like people that do care a lot more about grammar are seeing them. So I feel it's like very helpful to you in actuality to like stop doing this, okay? Or do this, like, at least acknowledge this when, and I think, again, why we're talking about it so much now is the next time you go and write something, you'll see it more, right? Because we talked about it so much. You'll be like, oh, I see I started something with but here. I need to erase that and or add it to the other sentence, okay? Because other people, when they grade your papers in the future, are going to see this a lot more, right? They're going to take more points off because of this issue. And I think just one of those things, for whatever reason, we all know not to start with and, but a lot of these other ones, we don't know that as well, right? Conclusion. In summary, fanboys are powerful tools for correcting ideas. Using them within sentences rather than at the start strengthens your writing by making it clear and more cohesive. Avoiding fanboys at the beginning of sentences helps prevent choppy writing and allows for more sophisticated, polished communication. Remember, think of fanboys as bridges that link your ideas. When you use them correctly, they make your writing easier to follow and more engaging. Let's practice this skill in our next assignment to build stronger and more connected arguments. Speaking of which, strengthening transitions for cohesion in academic writing. Today, we're going to focus on an important element in academic writing, transitions. Transitions are the words and phrases that connect your ideas and guide your reader through your argument. Without them, your writing can feel disjointed and difficult to follow. Think of transitions like bridges between the islands of your ideas. Without these bridges, your readers have to jump from one idea to another, which can be confusing and frustrating. Main point number 1, why transitions matter. Transitions are crucial because they give your essay a sense of flow and structure. They signal relationships between ideas, helping readers understand how one point leads to another. They ensure that your argument progresses logically rather than abruptly jumping from one point to point. For example, instead of writing, technology has many benefits, it can also cause issues. You could use a transition to show the relationship between these two ideas. Technology has many benefits, however, it can also cause issues. Key takeaway, transitions help make your writing make sense and improve readability. Main point 2, types of transitions. There are different types of transitions that you can use depending on how your ideas relate to one another. Here are a few common types. Addition. When you want to add a similar point to what you've already said. Examples like moreover, in addition, and furthermore. To contrast. When you're pointing out a difference or contradiction. Examples, however, in contrast, on the other hand. Cause and effect. When you're explaining the result or consequence of something. Examples, as a result, therefore, and consequently. For example, when you're giving an example to support your point. Examples, for instance, for example, to illustrate. This will show you how different types of transitions can change the relationship between ideas. Here's an example. Sentence 1. Eating healthy is important for maintaining a good lifestyle. Sentence 2. Junk food has become more accessible to people. Now, using transitions to link these two ideas. Eating healthy is important for maintaining a good lifestyle. However, junk food has become more accessible to people. Discussion. How transitions contribute to clarity. Let's talk about why transitions are so important in academic writing. Clarity. Transitions help clarify the relationship between your ideas. They signal to the reader whether you're adding more information, contrasting ideas, or showing cause and effect. Reader flow. When you use transitions effectively, your readers don't have to pause and try to figure out how one idea connects to another. They can follow the natural flow of your argument. Cohesion. Transitions help you create a cohesive argument where each point naturally leads to the next, making your overall essay feel well structured. Imagine reading an essay that jumps from one idea to the next without any clear connection. You'd probably struggle to follow the writer's argument, right? That's why transitions are so important. They smooth out those jumps and guide the reader from one idea to the next. Conclusion. In conclusion, transitions are essential to creating cohesive, clear, and structured academic writing. By using words like moreover, in contrast, and as a result, you can guide your reader through your argument and make sure your writing is easy to follow. Remember, effective transitions help your reader understand how your ideas are connected, keeping them engaged and ensuring your argument flows smoothly.